Hey everybody, James here with Modal Electronics, and welcome to Quick Dive. In this episode, we're talking all about progressive house plucks. And that is something that's near and dear to my heart because that is pretty much the first kind of sound that I set out to learn how to design when I was sort of becoming a sound designer slash producer in the early 2000s, 2006 timeframe. And also right around that time frame is when Deadmau5 and Eric Prydz were on a very, very fast rise to fame. They hadn't quite hit it really big yet, but they were definitely getting there. They were getting some hits on Beatport. But their signature sound is very much based on this progressive house pluck that I'm talking about. And I used to study that and try to mimic the tunes that they made, and I learned how to play a lot of their songs. And it really helped me actually with sound design in general because the stuff that I learned about the process in making it actually applies to other types of presets, and in general just makes you a little bit more confident when you're sound designing because you already know what to expect out of an envelope. And that's really what this is all about. This is about getting familiar with the timing and the behavior of envelopes. In this case, particularly the filter envelope. So I know that sounds super nerdy, but it's actually super fun to make one, and it does not take long. That's why this is a quick dive and not a deep dive. So let's dive in. We're going to be using this Cobalt 8X as the primary demonstrator. However, this is all very applicable to an argon as well. It really doesn't matter because we're going to be using a saw wave, and there's a saw wave on both of them, or a sawtooth. I guess I'll just show you what the initial shape that you're looking for is going to look like to begin with, but we're going to end up using the app for the most part because the app has everything laid out, and it's just a little easier to explain stuff when it's all right there in front of you. So when you go to your filter envelope, right there, just turn the sustain down to 0, and you'll have your decay anywhere around here, right? And then your release, you can't really tell what it is unless you actually boost up your sustain ever so slightly, and then you can kind of get a feel for your release right there. But that's the shape you're kind of looking for. This is not what I typically do when I'm making a pluck. I start a different way, but it's a good visual because if you're not using the app, at least you'll know what to be looking for. The depth is everything. You're going to want the depth cranked up. And of course, you're going to want to have a little bit of release on your amp envelope. So that's kind of where you're starting. We're going to hit initialize though and start over from the app side of things. A sine wave here. I'm going to just move this up to 63 and make it a sawtooth. I'm going to pull the width down to 0 because I just want it to be nice and even to the left and right. And we'll make the spread just a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more character. We're not going to really worry about oscillator 2 right now. I'm just going to be working with oscillator 1. Later on, once we get everything figured out up here, then we can add in some modulation that will move the mix over to oscillator 2. But for now, let's stick with oscillator 1. As you know, we're going to be dialing in a little bit of release on the amp envelope to have a tail, right? We're going to want to bring the cutoff all the way down until it kills the sound. Now we got nothing, right? Well, not until we push the depth back up to 64. Let's get the sustain down so it ends on a nice low note. Now here, at this point, if you press a note and hold it, you can move your sustain up so that way if you're ever holding a note, you'll know where it's going to end up at. If you want it to be audible when you're still holding a note, you'll want to move the sustain up a bit. And if you want it to be completely invisible and cut off, then obviously you'll want to keep your sustain near or at 0. I always find a happy medium in between. And your release. When you let go, this is going to determine whether or not the filter closes back on itself or if it stays open. Getting to know the release and its behavior on the filter is very important because it will affect the way your plucks behave after you let go of the note. Now, as you can see from the overhead, I'm just tapping it. Now, I'm going to go back and change something here. I'm going to make the decay very, very short, right? Watch what happens when I press down the note when the decay is very short. Well, actually, let's kill the sustain. This will be a much better example if I kill the sustain. All right, so watch what happens when I press this note here and the sustain is at 0. It's almost instantaneously closing, right? It's just a very staccato kind of stab. But if I were to slap it and let go of it right away, it's no longer relying on the decay anymore because we've let go of the note so quickly. It's already on to the release phase. So understanding that relationship between these two is really the key to dialing in a pluck that makes sense to what you're programming. And of course, once you've actually programmed one or recorded one, it'll depend on how long or short your notes are. So when you're, in Ableton and you're recording these notes, be conscious of the fact that long notes are going to be relying on the timing of the decay, whereas very short notes, if they're like 16th note, staccato stabs like this, most of it is going to be dependent on your release timing. You can play it safe by timing these very similarly, so you'll get the same effect whether or not you're stabbing or whether you're, holding down the notes more often. You can just time these right here very similarly, and that way when you play, there won't be too much of a difference between the two. They're not going to be identically timed, obviously, so you're going to have to tinker with this a little bit and dial it into what you think is a good fit for your riff. Now, I pre-recorded a riff here. It's built into one of these presets, actually. It's synced with it or sequence linked to it. So I'm going to bring up S3 Go to Pluck. Overall, when I play this, it's very muted and muffled, right? But if I move the mod wheel up, we get an epic rise, and there's actually quite a few things happening here. And I'm going to just run through it real quick so you understand. Y+, that would be the mod wheel. That's right over here, these modulations, they're all Y+. That's all mod wheel. So anytime I'm doing this, it is causing these variables to increase. So B1 is the spread. That's going to be increasing the detune between the oscillators. The cutoff obviously is going to be opening up on the filter. The mix is going to be shifting from all the way to this oscillator group and actually mixing into oscillator 2 on this one. And the AEG depth is actually the amp envelope depth right here. What that actually does is increases the volume, because when I'm moving the mix back to center and kind of mixing in the other oscillator, the volume naturally is actually going to dip down a little bit. So I wanted to counter that by adding in a little bit of AEG depth increase. I also have the depth of the filter envelope itself being modulated by the mod wheel right there. So it's about halfway, and then this will finish boosting it up to full. It does make a very minor adjustment to the amp envelope release, but that's not always necessary. This is just an example of the kind of modulations you can add to help keep your pluck behaving in a manner that you want it to as you increase the filter. And why would you want to increase the filter? Well, if you've listened to that kind of progressive house sound, that's pretty much what this formula is based on, is that you have this main riff being played, right? And then, you wait maybe 8 bars or 16 bars. A couple of things cue in the process. You might have a layer of drums kick in, and then you have a rise and a fill. Then that's essentially progressive house. It starts to progressively build more and more layers upon layers and becomes this very intricate kind of ensemble wall of sound. And I absolutely love it, because I think the pluck is such a great way of reinforcing rhythm and while also building a melody, because it's like having melodic drums. If you think of them like that, you can just think of all sorts of crazy polyrhythms. And then of course I added a little bit of ping pong delay, quite a bit of feedback, and then I actually more lately now I've been a fan of going in, I'm holding shift, and I'm actually reducing the width of the ping pong delay so it sounds a little bit more like little hits that are actually dead center, as opposed to obviously being delay hits which are wide off to the left and to the right. So if you reduce that width to nothing, it'll just sound like you're playing a bunch of little smaller rhythms manually. as you can tell, it's a lot of fun and it's quite easy to make a pluck. It really doesn't take much. You just got to get the shape right, dial it into your settings, and then come up with something that you like to play. The one key to getting a pluck sounding just right is really going to be about what you write, what you record. I recorded this as a sequence. I just went to town, I played to the click of the track, and if you don't know how to do that, actually, you can check the quick dive before this because that explains exactly how to do it. So you can go check that out, then come back and watch this video again, and it should be all set. You can make all sorts of great chord progressions that can end up being the foundation of a track. It helped me so much as a new producer to have a way of getting my musical ideas down in a manner that also fits the style that I was going after. Even if I didn't make a whole lot of dead mouse sounding tracks, it really didn't matter. It still was a good thing to have in my repertoire. It was because from there I'm able to translate that and make plucky bass sounds. I can, if you decrease the decay, for example, boost up the sustain, play with the release a little bit. You can get a little bit more like keys going. Add a little bit of attack and decrease that res. You got brass. Add a little bit more attack to the amp envelope with a heavy decay. Decreased release, and you have something a little bit more symphonic. All sorts of possibilities with this thing. Hope you enjoyed this quick dive. If you have any questions or you want to post up your comments, please do. We always like hearing from fellow Argon and Cobalt owners. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe, and check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our newsletter over at modalelectronics.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care, guys.